I would ask if there are any reports from any other trustees. Trustee Stone.
Yeah. A health issue has been brought to my attention by a Golden Bison business owner in our community, as well as a number of other people in our community. Rick Rubenstein is here tonight to tell us what he is experiencing firsthand. I have spoken with an EPA inspector, Environmental Protection Agency, and consulted with an engineer well-versed in this topic. There is a landfill just north of Wildfire and south of the Highland Park Health and Fitness Club. There has been a foul and noxious odor in these areas of Buffalo Grove and the surrounding communities for many years. This landfill is a compost landfill owned by Land and Lakes with headquarters in Park Ridge. The engineer explained that what is occurring is not a normal process for a compost site. The organic process that produces these kinds of odors don't occur at these temperatures. The primary component of the compost reaction is methane, which is odorless, but characteristic of this process is that you'd get hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide, and that gives the characteristics of a rotten egg smell. But that process won't even start until you get above 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. This leads me to believe that the source may not be compost. I feel that we should have an immediate testing of the groundwater near this site and the runoff water, which should be going into the sewer for filtration, and also the vapor in the air. Currently, the Director of Health in Lake County is who these complaints are brought to. I am requesting that we have an independent test, as the testing needs to be done, and it needs to be done by an impartial entity outside of our community. Some of the relationships that exist between some of the parties involved, whether they sit on the boards together or affiliated, but it is important that that the testing be done with the highest of integrity and reliability. So just to be clear, just to be very clear, and not, excuse me. Well, I'll wait till you guys are finished. Okay. What's concerning me is that the owner of Land and Lakes sits on a board with the Director of Health of Lake County. Now, when there's complaints that come forward in our community regarding potential hazards or something that, like a noxious smell, for instance, we have something called the Solid Waste Delegation Agreement between the Illinois EPA and Lake County. So normally some would have to go to the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. Instead, they go right to Lake County. So my concern, of course, is that if they're going to a man that sits on a board with the man that owns the company, that is a slight concern to me. Not suggesting that there's anything wrong, but when it comes to the health and safety at this degree particularly, I feel that we need to have an outside source. And just to give you another idea, the materials of a compost landfill, if they're not managed properly, which means moving the soil around so that the materials don't become anaerobic, which means without oxygen. The things that can occur either to the groundwater underneath, which we don't drink in Buffalo Grove, but Long Grove does, and I used to live in unincorporated Deerfield. Those are people that drink that don't have Lake Michigan water. So I'm concerned about the groundwater. I'm concerned about that if the stormwaters that land on the compost, if they're, when they run off, I think they call it runoff water or something of that nature, it's supposed to go into a sewer and then into a filtration. If it goes into a body of water like a pond or a creek or, I don't know, the Des Plaines River that's right there, that would be obviously a big problem because those are contaminated, they could be contaminated. As well as the fumes that are reaching. I spoke to the manager at Wildfire, and while the fumes don't penetrate the inside of Wildfire, it's outside. If you've ever been to Wildfire, the smell of fertilizer that you smell, it's not really fertilizer. When you're at Highland Park Health and Fitness, which I remember years ago I was at, and we would wonder what was happening with the sewers because inside it would smell really bad. So when Rick Rubenstein brought this to my attention about 6 weeks ago, it was a complaint that he originally had in August when he moved into his office on Barclay. And I would very much like if Rick Rubenstein, he is a Golden Bison member of our community and business, If we could just give him a moment or two to explain, because it's a very serious health issue, and I think it requires an urgent action, actually. Could we just ask him for a moment to get up? Would that be okay, President Hartstein? He's right here.
I certainly will. I'm happy to hear Mr. Rubenstein. The appropriate time is during village comments, but I will have no problem with him coming forward at this time.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Rick. Yeah, thanks very much. And I hope that, just to note, there have been other complaints, I believe, recently to the village, and in the community, people are discussing the fumes that I think we all, now that we reflect back, have been for many, many years. And I think we need to realize, as I was told, that let me just say one thing, Rick, okay, before I forget to say this. Just 1 second. As I said, I think we need immediate testing, and well, I'll let you say the rest. Thank you very much.
RMS has been operating in the village of Buffalo Grove for the last 21 years. And the last 4 months we've been on Barclay Boulevard. Previously we were down the Buffalo Grove Business Park on Lake Cook. First question I have is, when we moved in, we immediately smelled, and we thought the landlord had done fertilization of the landscaping, but in fact, day after day we had the same smell. We finally found out where it was coming from. And I'm sort of curious because we can't be the first people who have smelled this. I talked to our landlord, who indicated that 25 to 30 days a year this smell was prevalent. Probably the first 40 business days we were there, which would have been September and October, we probably smelled it 30 of those days. It does come into our facility because we have an open dock, and it comes into the dock. We have people working there. My first contact was with Mr. Brimm, who I had a couple of conversations with. I then contacted the Environmental Protection Agency, and although it was a few years ago, I did work for the EPA, the Division of Air Pollution Control, in the early 70s. A smell of this nature would not have been tolerated. The gentleman at the EPA told me that these matters were handled by the Lake County Department of Health. I contacted a gentleman there, and again, it was sort of, he didn't have any idea such a thing was going on. But he did mention that he sat on a board with either the owner or the operator of the facility, and he would talk to him. Well, whether or not he talked to him, I don't know, because he never got back to me. I spoke to a gentleman at Land and Lakes, and I said to him, you know, we're right just west of you, and we're getting this smell on a continual basis. And he was surprised that there was some smell coming from his facility. And half sarcastically, most sarcastically, I said to him, "Are you there every day?" And he said yes. And I find it extremely difficult to believe, unless his nostrils have been destroyed, in a sense the smell was gone, that he couldn't smell this. Subsequent to that, I picked up a salad at Wildfire, got out of my car, and got hit with it. And I walked into Wildfire and I talked to one of the owners at Wildfire and asked him about it. And he said, yeah, whatever it was 10 years ago when they moved into the facility, they had complained about it, nothing ever happened with it, and they dropped it from that point on. You talk to people in the neighborhood, and I'm sort of surprised that, you know, I'm the only one who's ever raised this issue, because you talk to people in the neighborhood and say, oh yeah, I smell something, but I don't know what it is, and no one really ever did anything about it. Fact of the matter is, it is a disgusting smell. It should not be tolerated in the village of Buffalo Grove. And all I'm asking for really is some response from people. No one has said to me, you're nuts and you can't do this. No one has said to me that it is legal for a facility to do odor pollution in the air. In fact, no one's really gotten back to me. So I've come here tonight to plead my case to the village because I'm not happy. I mean, I was a wildfire last week picking up a salad. It was 30 degrees out. I got out of the car, and there's the smell again. And I talked to the people at Wildfire, and they said their customers have come in and complained just that day. So you tell me.
Well, I thank you for being here tonight and sharing this with us. I would ask if our village manager might be able to give any brief response at this time to what his knowledge is of this and what has or has not transpired to his knowledge, and then we certainly can follow up and get back to you with any further details of what can be done or what the exact facts are in terms of the follow through. Mr. Brimm.
Thank you. I do acknowledge I did talk to Rick. I think it was in August, wasn't it, Rick, or August or September, or late summer, early fall. And I know that I talked to Jim Cowie and President of Land and Lakes and Marty Hanley. They've always told us, the Vice President and their environmental engineer, we've been told that anytime we get any complaints, we have to let them know. They're required by the laws of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency to file reports with the agency whenever there's any odor complaints. Just last week, there was a call. I received a call from the Affinity Healthcare ownership, and there was an odor problem over there. I talked to the environmental engineer for Land and Lakes, and they were up there doing some composting, turning some material over that they got late in the season. That facility is in post-closure, but it is a licensed and regulated landscape yard waste facility. They are licensed to operate by the state of Illinois and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. The pile, if you will, the mound is in closure and going through closure activities, but they do receive and continue to receive yard waste that's dropped off. They recently received a lot of Christmas trees and holiday trees, and they were composting them. It's really licensed as a transfer facility. They haul to a permanent location when they can seasonally get at this location in southern Wisconsin. Over the course of the next year, they'll be moving that transfer operation across the street to the east side of Milwaukee Avenue, where they do have a licensed and regulated site to operate a transfer facility there. So they have been doing some composting and some turning over, on material that they received late in the year. But the comments that were made earlier are correct. Whenever we receive any complaints, we do file them with the IEPA. Land and Lakes is again required as a condition of their post-closure. But the IEPA, as we've discussed, and we discussed at length with the annexation of the property, is assigned all the regulatory activities to the counties. In other words, the Lake County Health Department. So any complaints that are routed through and any types of issues like this do go to the County of Lake, and the Health Department does monitor them and then reports back. We'll bring this to their attention again tomorrow. We do have, both Geeta and myself have a very good line of communication with all the parties at Land and Lakes. I've always found them to be very cooperative. They want to be good neighbors. I believe that they strive to be good neighbors, but again, they do run a licensed, regulated, open landscape transfer facility there and have been for a long time. Again, there will be issues with odors on a periodic basis, but the operation is winding down, and frankly, they hope in a few years to actually start redeveloping that parcel, and they're going to moving the transfer operation to the east side of Milwaukee Avenue, where they have an approved site and just have to finish the construction of what's necessary. On the east side of the street, and we'll move even further away from any of the industrial, commercial, or office sites on the west side of Milwaukee Avenue, along Barclay, along Bush Parkway, and those streets that are immediate to the actual site.
I would simply ask that you follow up with the health department and then follow up with our resident and business owner.
Absolutely.
And also bring a report back to the board for our next meeting, please. Further reports from trustees. Trustee Sussman. Did you have something further, Trustee Stone?
I did.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to respond and ask one question. Manager Brimm, how many years has that landfill been there?
With that landfill, I would say, what did they tell us? Probably in excess of 50 years that landfill has been there. That landfill precedes the incorporation of the village. It's been in the Cowie family, Land and Lakes, for I'd like to say that, I'm just trying to think when Jim and we had a lot of discussion with them, I'd say that opened in the late 40s, early 50s. It's always accepted yard waste. It's never accepted garbage and construction debris. And in the last years of its operation, it only accepted yard waste. Again, it's capped, it's enclosure. They do have a permit to work on the very top of it. The fill is settling, but that's how long it's been there. You know, it precedes the village's incorporation.
Thank you. So it's been there a long time. I have two points I just want to make, just because it is a very important topic. A is, was Rick Rubenstein's the first complaint you've heard in all your years in management or working for the village?
No, I've heard complaints very rarely, but I have heard complaints about, especially in very warm times of the summer when people would have their windows and there's an extreme volume of yard waste that was coming in, and they were actually composting. Again, they're enclosure now, but they were actually not only transferring, but they were composting and building up the pile.
Okay, I just want to mention that 16 plus years ago when I lived on Inverurie on Pintail, we lived with this noxious smell, thinking it was water or something of that nature. Now I'm understanding better that there was a landfill, and I understand there some towns do have landfills. I know that Evanston just closed their landfill, and so did Hillside, because the people in the community and the business community would not tolerate it. I just want to make that clear that that does happen, and I want to make another point to say that while they may have a permit and things of that sort, inspection is critical. And like I said, I personally feel that an outside source should be testing. I don't know how the community feels, but I have a problem when anyone that sits on the same board together of any nature is the very person that's testing that person at a different level. Well, they actually sit on a board regarding, it's one of the, well, there's many boards that are involved in Lake County, but I think everyone's getting the picture of what I'm talking about. I would ask that we do that and that we don't follow our usual protocol, because we've had this intense smell that in this cold weather there should not be the smell. That is not, from what the engineer that I spoke to, who is a very renowned engineer, that's not indicative of methane. So I want to be very clear. So thank you very much, and I want to be sure that an outside source, can I ask, could we have an outside source? Would that be okay?
I do not believe this is beyond the purview of the village to get into testing. There are particular bodies that deal with this.
It's our health. I think that would be our
Excuse me, Trustee Stone. This is trustee reports. I've given you a lot of latitude on this. We're going to have a report back. We're going to have the village manager follow up on this, and I believe we will have to determine what the facts are, what can be done, what is being done. I think it's premature for us to be speculating on what we should or shouldn't be doing when we have not followed through and heard back from our village manager. We're hearing this tonight. You didn't have to do it at the village meeting. You could have followed up with this and requested it to be done immediately when you had this complaint, to have some follow through done. It's going to be done. It's going to be followed up, and that's the appropriate procedure.
Well, do you mean I should have contacted the board on this issue?
I mean, that's what the village manager, and you could have asked that something be done and be followed up on.
Enough, I did contact you in the past 2 weeks about a different very important health issue, and I didn't hear back from one board member. So I'll leave it at that. A different issue, not about compost, but regarding a drug issue. I heard back from nobody on the board. So I would come to you if I felt I would get any type of response, and I don't on some issues. So that's why I'm here talking about an issue that's a health issue. And given the set of circumstances, I would hope that we would all send in some sort of word how we feel about an outside source. I think it's imperative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quick follow-up on the earlier trustee report. Mr. Brimm, when you get back to us on the question of land and lakes, it might be helpful for you to summarize for our newer trustees some of the history of this landfill and how it came into the village, the fact that it had been in unincorporated Lake County for all but the last couple of years, that it hadn't been in the village of Buffalo Grove, as well as the independent environmental review that was done in connection with a proposal that came before the board about a year or two ago. I think that would help give Trustee Stone some comfort in the history and also the due diligence of the village in connection with this particular facility, as well as an explanation about how the capping has taken place and the intention of Land and Lake to transfer these operations off the top. And again, not to get into a quarrel, but just so that there's additional information that I think would be very helpful both to Mr. Rubenstein and also to the newer trustees who weren't up here during the time when we addressed some of those issues, or some of the issues were addressed by the village. Lastly, the one thing I heard tonight that I found particularly troubling, given the fact that the Lake County has the regulatory purview and essentially supersedes our authority in most respects with regard to the landfill. The fact that the head of the Board of Health did not respond to me is very troubling, and I think that maybe it might be advisable to contact County Commissioner David Stallman and ask him to get involved as well if we don't get a quick response from the director of the Board of Health, so that we can use whatever channels we have available to us to make sure that they're paying attention.
This is directly to what he said, so please can I respond?
This is not the appropriate way to do it, but I'm going to let you do it because this is trustee reports where this is not for interchange.
Thank you. Actually, I just want everyone to know, when Rick Rubenstein contacted me about 7 weeks ago, I did contact David Stallman immediately, and he was very responsive, and he contacted Bill Brimm, and then Bill responded. Well, he didn't call you? Okay, well, Rick Rubenstein, you know when I called David Stallman, that's when you got action. Okay, so thank you, David Stallman, because he did. He got things going. I don't know at what level, who he called, but he called somebody. So my point is that, and he said, when the weather warms up, let us know if it smells again. So when it just reoccurred last week, when Rick let me know, I started looking into the EPA and things of that nature. So that's why I went directly that way. But I just want to say one thing, Trustee Berman. I appreciate what you're saying. As a new trustee, we don't have the history, and I can tell you it's frustrating on a lot of levels. I want to learn so much so quick, and it is difficult. But one thing that, regardless of the history that I know or don't know, I don't care how many papers anyone shows me about what permits, what's passed, what hasn't. When you have a smell that's ongoing for years at this level, if all the papers in the world say it's checked out right, I'm still going to tell you something's wrong. So I don't care what the papers say. Something's wrong. It smells too bad for too long of a time.
Which has come before us recently. There were some concerns, health concerns, relating to the Land O'Lakes transfer station, and we received from County Commissioner Stallman a report which was forwarded to him by the representatives of the health department up in Lake County, giving us a clean bill of health with regard to the Land O'Lakes landfill. So there are no violations currently, and everything appears to be safe with regard to from an environmental standpoint, based upon the inspections which were completed by the Lake County Health Department. And I'm also very, very pleased to have that result to share with the public. At this time, I will ask if there are any reports from trustees. Trustee Stone.
I want to speak to the issue of the landfill and the composting issue that one of our businessmen in the community, Rick Rubenstein, brought up at the last meeting. And I had contacted Dave Stallman myself, and I appreciate that Dave Stallman took swift action. I believe at the last meeting when I mentioned that he did call Mr. Brimm didn't remember so, but that is what took place. And again, I thank Dave Stallman for being on top of our issues in Lake County. What has come to my attention, I won't go into any depth, but I just want to hit on this point, because again, I don't feel that this is an issue that the trustees are aware of or in charge of. But I want to be very clear about it because it really does concern me. And I've been sending emails back and forth, and I'm not going to go into reading them, but I've made sure that I'm still investigating, and there is some things that have not been definitively figured out. Well, there have been issues that have been figured out. The issue is that in November '07 and in June '08, the Land O'Lakes company or property management came before our board wanting to annex into Buffalo Grove. And I watched the DVDs, and you can all rent those DVDs if you want from the village. November '07, 6/08. And I'm sure the management can tell you which days those meetings occurred. And actually, Trustee Berman did say to Land and Lakes, there's been issues with smell and this and that. We can't, he's concerned about that. And they assured him. Their attorney assured, Matt Norton assured him that they weren't composting. And their engineer, Bruce Knapp, they both spoke to the point and said, we're not composting. And in the minutes from the Plan Commission, they said, we're not composting. They said actually in '04, they had made a decision not to compost because it was so offensive or unaccepted in the area because of the smell that goes along with composting, that in City Park and places in the area, Highland Park Health and Fitness, Affinity Medical Center, if you've ever been in that area, you know the smell that smells like fertilizer. So the bottom line is that they presented that they weren't composting. Now what's interesting is that They did go ahead and compost. And in fact, just months before, they had applied to renew their permit that they've had for many years that allowed them to compost years prior. Actually, the state's attorney got involved because of the smell years before, which is why in 1107, they said to us in 04 that they stopped composting. It's complicated, but this is what's really happening. This is my big concern. And I hope the board is going to help me on resolving this really big concern. The big concern is that they're composting, and I have emails that are contradicting. I'm nervous because this is actually unbelievable to me. The emails state on January 22nd by Manager Brimm telling us how that the reason that the smell was is that there was a late composting order, the machine broke, they didn't get to it. Actually, Lake County Health did go in and give them a violation the month prior because Rick Rubenstein went right to Lake County Health. And that was on January 22nd that we have this email. And I sent to the board, if you remember the 18th meeting when Manager Brimm said that Dave Stolman didn't contact him, I sent him the email. And I'm saying this because it's about health. And when it comes to health and safety and things that can contaminate water and things of that issue, there is no room for misunderstanding and confusion. So there's an email that, an email actually changed words. If you can ever imagine a past email changing words, I'm not sure of the answer. We're still waiting on that answer. I don't know that there could be an answer, so obviously that's quite concerning to me. So the concern is that now, today I get an email after looking at the permit that they by permit, by the EPA, are allowed to compost, although they came in front of this board and said that they weren't going to. I think you would all attest to that because I just watched the meeting, those two meetings. And Trustee Berman, I thank you for asking them about that point because that was a very concerning point. No one wants to live with that stench or work around that stench. And they committed to they're not composting and that the landfill was in post-closure, it's going to be sealed. So in the meantime, two facts. I have an email today from Manager Brimm saying they're not a composting operation. Okay, I'm spinning because I'm not sure how do you reconcile that with an email January 22nd explaining that they compost and it was a late order that they took in. Any answer, I would just want some answers. And, you know, given the laws, violations of the Open Meetings Act, you can't really confer with a group of trustees. It's illegal. You have to be in the public. So I'm not trying to be a troublemaker. There is no other place to talk about it. If you email your violation of the Open Meetings Act, if you go talk privately, you can't. You have to be in the public to discuss these things. So I'm between a rock and a hard place. I would like an answer to emails that one says one thing and one says another. You know, one says I'm 5'2" and the other says I'm 5'9". It's not possible. You're not both. Additionally, Dave Stolman did get right on it, and I've been speaking with many different people from the EPA, and the issue is this, is that they can check for, and what they did, they checked the cap of the landfill to see if it was leaking any methane gas, which it wasn't, thank goodness. And they checked to see if they saw any leachate seeps. These are all things that you don't want, put it that way. You don't want them getting in the ground. You don't want it affecting groundwater. You want to make sure that storms, when they hit the compost, if they're composting, which, I mean, they are composting, they said they weren't going to, that's all bacteria that's like it's called percolating. If you don't lay compost out right, it's, anyone who knows anything about this, you'll understand what I'm saying. I'm just learning about it quickly. So the fact is that when stormwater hits it, if it doesn't go into the sewer and then go through filtration, it gets into bodies of water. So any ponds or retentions or anything around, if that water is not healthy water, and there's different symptoms. And I'm not saying smelly water necessarily means something bad. I really don't know, but I want to know. I do want to know that because there's a lot of wells that different people drink from, whether it's Long Grove, unincorporated Deerfield, unincorporated Riverwoods, unincorporated Prairie Grove. These are all areas that drink that water. Buffalo Grove proper, we get Lake Michigan water, but you know, you got to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy. Yeah, this is a health issue. Let me just finish, okay? Because I think people will want to hear this.
Trustee Stone?
Uh-huh.
I'm very concerned because you're being very alarmist about something that basically I do not want, basically, I made clear that the health department gave us a clean bill of health. They did an inspection. I don't want anybody to come out of here
Okay, and
or anybody at
I'm not
home
gonna
to
alarm
believe that there is any health risk at this point in
Yes.
time based upon the inspections which were done just this last week by the
This
Lake
is
County
what I'd
Health
like to
Department.
say,
And that's
though.
the reason it's
I hear
important.
you.
I don't
Okay.
want anybody to be
And I
misled.
won't alarm
And that was the
anybody.
reason I cut you
I
off.
gotcha. Okay, and I appreciate that, President Hartstein. And again, this is not something that I think that this board, I knew that they were concerned about it when it was annexed in, so I know that that was their thought. And I know the Plan Commission was told also that they would not be composting, so this is concerning to me. When someone asks for permission for one thing and does another, that should be concern for all of us. But this is what I would like, this is what I'm hoping for, to make everyone feel secure, is that given that this company, Land and Lakes, also known as Prairie Recreational, or I forget the other name, they go under various names, they own landfills and compost sites and things of that nature around Illinois. There's many wells that could be affected by groundwater in this area. I'm not sure how many. Perhaps the engineers would know if there's 20 or 15 or 30. The regulation is self-regulating right now, so that means that people that own a landfill or a compost site, they get the water tested. The EPA says 4 times a year you must get it tested. We have a Lake County delegation agreement, which means Lake County can do the testing. The fact is that I'd feel comfortable if it was a separate body that were testing it. But they're allowed to hire their own private testers, their own companies. And just like you don't take the LSATs at home or the ACT at home, you have someone else take the, you have controls on a test. And I've spoken to Sid Mathias about this. I would like there to be some legislation. I'm hoping the board can help draft legislation that we could suggest to State Rep Sid Mathias that would demand that you have to have tests done by the EPA directly, and you can't hire your own company because there's the risk. And furthermore, it's not just a matter that they can hire their own company. They may even, and I don't know this answer yet, but some can and some can't, may even be allowed to collect their own water samples. So you could look to 20 years history in Springfield on paper, and it can look fabulous. But what I'd like is to see the wells tested. It's not a very costly endeavor, and I think every so often they should test all wells and not just one well, and test for to be sure that there are no contaminants. Because when you have a landfill, and the landfill was there first, so in all fairness, it was there many years ago from, I think, it stopped in 92 or so, or 95, but there's different things that you do for testing, and as I just explained, the integrity of the testing, that's what's concerning me. So yes, it's not leaking through the cap, but they didn't test the composition of the gas. That concerns me. And equally, I think the wells need to be tested, and that's why I just want to say to your point, now that you are learning as much as I'm learning by these emails, I hope you're all equally curious and demanding answers for this. Because, like I said, I would talk to you privately, but it's against the law. I'm not looking to embarrass anyone, but I simply am not going to sit by and watch something that, to me, seems like the testing method, and given there's a lot of contradictions, these emails in the past month regarding this composting site are truly concerning. So I would just ask if the board or wherever we're supposed to meet and talk about it, what and when we can do this, because I'm very concerned. And Trustee Berman, I know you were concerned about the smells originally, and they told you that they weren't going to compost. And in the newspaper, it actually says, if you go to June 06, the attorney from Holland and Knight, big law firm, that he actually says it's not a compost site and it's not a landfill. Well, it is a landfill, so I'm not sure how that could be stated that way, and it is a compost site. So, again, I invite all of you to help me. Let's go to talk to Sid Mathias about legislation to change for all of Illinois the testing of water and who's doing the testing and the integrity of it. We can't afford to be wrong. And in any business or industry, obviously there's room for issues. So I just want to make sure that everything's in the right place. And I think this situation, I'd love for any of the seniors.
Trustee Stone, quite clearly.
Well, can someone speak to the email issue, because it's the email can Manager Brimm tell us, is it a composting site? Is it not a composting site?
I will ask the
Thank you.
manager. Your report is now complete.
Thank you.
Mr. Brimm.
The Land and Lake site, again, the site that's on the west, they own 2 parcels. One's developed, one's not, but the one on the west side of Milwaukee Avenue is a closed landfill site that accepted for many years when it was first developed. I think its presence is greater than 40 years in this area. Construction debris, and I guess basically in the first part of its life, non-garbage, if you will, non-traditional garbage, construction debris, those types of materials. Later in its permitting process and development process, they accepted yard waste, grass, leaves, clippings, things like that. I believe up until the late 1990s. And then at that point, they went into a post-closure phase on the back of the fill, and on the front, it's ready for development. The site they've represented, in the best of my knowledge and remembrance of the process, in following the Land and Lakes process before I was manager and after being manager, is that the site has been closed. And although they are permitted to do composting on the site, they're permitted to do 3 things on the site. Based on the permit that I distributed to the board, they're allowed to do composting and the processes that are involved with composting, basically the collection, they can process, they can windrow, and there's parameters that are set up by the EPA for windrowing. They have the permission to have a transfer station for the collection of yard waste and to be hauled off-site. It's in the permit, it's noted to be hauled off-site to other locations, and they have the permission to run a retail operation where they sell end product to landscapers, composted materials in addition to sand, dirt, wood chips, things like that. The recent issue of the odors was not related to active composting. It was related to an order that was given by the Lake County Department of Health. The site had, by their own admission, by the admission of Land and Lakes, they had leaf mulch product that was there as an end product to be sold to landscapers. It was there too late into the season. There was too much volume that was on the site at the end of the season, and they were directed by the county, not at their own volition, but at the county's volition, to go out and basically break the mound of leaves that they had, leaf mulch, again, that was there for retail sale, and windrow it so it would decompose and then be processed and then be hauled off-site. And that's what created the smell. And so really the composting that took place was not a planned activity, or although permitted activity, but it was a result of an action as directed by the Lake County Department of Health. I continue to, so I know there's been, the questions that I'm asked sometimes end up, I admit, end up being somewhat maybe potentially confusing answers, but sometimes the questions are not in a straight line or linear to me and my way of thinking, the ability to undertake the research, and for that I apologize for if my answers are not clear or based on my understanding of the questions. But again, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, what they are doing over there is permitted. It's permitted by the state of Illinois. It's not contrary to any laws. And again, the recent composting activities were directed not windrowing, composting and windrowing. That was not a planned process, but a directed process by the county.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee Brimm, yes.
Mr. Brimm, I know that this has been kind of going around and around a little bit, and I don't want to make it any longer than it has to, but I think it's important that for both the new trustees' benefit and our aid of recollection, because a lot of things happen up here and you don't necessarily remember them over the course of many years, but I'd like a written report from OVM that goes through the annexation process and just ties in the current activities to the annexation agreement and the annexation process, so that we all have a comfort level that what's happening out there is in conformance with the annexation agreement, and that if it's not, what we can do, if anything, to enforce the terms of the annexation so that they can't exceed their authority. I understand, and I looked at the permit, I'm not an environmental lawyer, but I understand the explanation you're making. I'd like to see that laid out in writing rather than you try to give that orally. Again, I think it would help everybody's understanding and ability to absorb the question. And lastly, I did just a quick look at the Illinois EPA website. In the last 15 years, there have been over 60 regulatory filings made with regard to this site, testing reports that have been filed. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to simply make a request to the IEPA for copies of that documentation so that we can at least review the documentation. I don't think it's fair, with all due respect to Trustee Stone, to assume that the testing agencies are somehow in cahoots and have done something inappropriate, but I'd like to see that documentation. I think the IEPA will make it available to us, and I suspect if necessary we can FOIA that. But I think it would be helpful for us to see it. I do believe, and I agree with the village president, that the report from the county is they went out, they tested, they tried to evaluate the concerns that were raised by Trustee Stone and the residents, and their conclusion was that there is no gas leak out there or gas emissions from the site, and there are no leachate emissions, and that it is in conformance with the requirements, and that's good news. But now I think we should take the extra step and just give the extra comfort. I think that's something staff can undertake and get back to us in 30 or 45 days with a written report, not piecemeal, but a comprehensive report so that everybody has the same information at the same time and can digest it. With regard to the correspondence question, I had asked the village president to undertake to look into that question, and I hope that when you've looked into it, you'll report back, again, uniformly to all of the trustees, not to one trustee, so that we all have the same information.
Good evening. I'm Rick Rubenstein. I was here a couple months ago, and I raised the issue of Lakes Landfill. And is it going to be on the agenda tonight, or?
It is. Well, at this point, the only thing on the agenda at this time, the only thing on the agenda, unless somebody brings something up during new business, is a resolution relating to statements made about it. But that is the only thing that's on the agenda this evening.
Then I would ask the board. I mean, it's been almost 2 months since I raised the issue. There's been articles in the newspaper, there's been information flowing from the Illinois Federal EPA, Lake County Health Department. There has not been one word flowing from the village of Buffalo Grove to the person who raised the issue. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for a response.
Now, I can tell you that the meeting after it was raised, we reported back that the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency and the Health Department, in fact, did an inspection and, in fact, found there were no violations whatsoever. That was reported back within one meeting after this particular matter was before us.
More importantly, from my standpoint, was the fact the issue I raised was, first of all, air pollution and putting noxious odors into the air is a violation under the rules of the EPA. So, but the issue I have again is I raised the issue to the village. I received no response. I raised the issue to Lake County Health Department. I received no response. I raised the issue to who I now find out is the mayor of Lake Forest, who was unclear what could be causing this smell. Now, what's the expression? It smells like there's a rat here somewhere? What I'd like to know, and I don't think it's unreasonable, it's now March, and the spring is coming, there will be grass clippings. It has been stated clearly by Mr. Brimm, by the owner of Land and Lakes, and I believe also by the director at the Lake County Health Department, that they are a transfer facility. They do not do any composting. And there shouldn't be any odors coming from that facility. So my question is, as I was quoted in the newspaper today, what's going to happen when April and May and June come? And I don't think that's an unreasonable request.
I will not entertain any discussion or any responses to this since this is at this time. But in the interest of sharing information with you, I will tell you that last week I attempted to speak to Mr. Cowie, and he was out of the country. I did get him out I was able to get him on the phone, and he said he would be happy to. He was in the middle of a seminar outside the country, and he said he'd be happy to talk about this. He said there's obviously no question that he wants to try and resolve these whatever issues there may be. I spent before I came to this evening's meeting, I spent 1/2 hour on the phone with Mr. Cowie, with Margaret Cowie, and Marty Hanley, who in fact are the 3 principals of the Land O'Lakes. And I can tell you that with regard to attempting, I said I wanted to set up a meeting to see how we can address any odors and so forth from their existing site, and to sit down and talk about it and to see what we can do with regard to that problem. To the extent that there is a problem, there may be other things in the area which may be causing the problem as well, because they are not the only one in the area that is composting. Quite frankly, in the immediate area, there are others. But let me just finish my. Pardon? They are. It is my understanding that they are in fact composting.
Which would cause odors?
It is possible, and there are procedures and so forth for dealing with that.
Mr. Harsey, I will sit down here to make you one statement.
I wanted to finish you didn't let me finish my response. My response was, I asked the 3 of them, two things. Number one, with regard to the transfer station, which we talked about and which we approved, which was the intent of moving the operation across the street to the east side, that is going to be solely a transfer station. And when because of the economy, it has not happened sooner. So it hasn't happened at this particular point in time. There will simply be a transfer station, and transfer station alone. They are not seeking a permit for anything other than a transfer station. There will be no composting. That is what was being discussed at our annexation hearing and at our various plan commission hearings, because we're talking about on the west side where they're now a commercial development. I next asked, so he said there's no question, and he assured me fully that no questions, in accordance with the annexation agreement, in accordance with the permits, there will be, in their new transfer station, strictly a transfer station. That's what they talked about during the proceedings. Now, when I asked him, can you tell me what we can or can't do with regard to the composting issue and whether that is in effect or if there's anything we can do to deal with it, I was advised that since certain actions have been initiated with various agencies through our congressmen and others, which were not authorized by this board or not initiated by this board, that because of those actions, and that those actions are pending, they have all been advised by their attorney not to make any statement, not to make any commitment, not to do anything or not discuss this particular item further in terms of resolution or otherwise until those investigations which have been initiated against them are completed. That is the advice of their attorney. So though I've attempted to try and set up a meeting to talk about resolution of the issue, at this particular point in time, they have been advised by their attorney that they cannot and they will not, based upon a direction from their attorney, discuss any further ideas or concepts relating to dealing with anything relating to the west side, other than the fact that they said that they will continue to comply with the law with regard to what they're allowed to do under the annexation agreement and under their permit. And in terms of making statements about what they will otherwise do or not do, they are not going to. They're not going to discuss it at this time. They said they were hopeful. They were hopeful that those investigations will be completed in short order, and as soon as they are, they will contact me, and they will be happy to sit down and discuss this particular issue.
Well, and I'll be succinct because I know you've got a lot to do tonight. We're talking about 2 separate issues. There's one issue as to whether or not they are doing anything to the environment. There's another issue with regarding the odor. Mr. Cowie, in the direct discussions that I had with him, denied there was any odor. So you just keep that in mind when you're talking to him, because he does not believe there's an odor problem. You take it for what it's worth. I've been there, it stinks. Okay? And it's very disappointing that you would get this from not only a landowner, but what I find out today is a public official, the mayor of Lake Forest. They must be very proud of this man, because I can tell you, he lied to me.
No, okay, you know, no, and as soon as there's an opportunity to deal with this, I do not want to entertain any discussion on this particular, we have many items to discuss. I will not recognize anyone for any discussion on this particular issue. We are now moving on to our consent agenda.